Tell us that.
Yeah. So, Dr. Rasmussen, we have made a connection. Good morning.
Good morning, Ursula.
Thank you so much for joining us. So we are talking about the case rates that we're seeing in Pierce County. They're the highest ever. In Snohomish County, they're near the highest ever. But we have heard from others and many of the skeptics who say, why do cases even matter? Why are we even talking about cases? They don't matter. It's only hospitalizations and deaths. Can you answer to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the reason why cases matter is that they are the precursor to those hospitalizations and deaths that you were talking about. First, we've seen this throughout the pandemic, that first we'll see a spike in cases, and then a couple weeks later we start to see hospitalizations spiking, and then a couple weeks after that we start to see deaths increase. So if we're looking at cases going up right now is the time that we need to really put on the brakes in terms of taking measures to reduce transmission. And that means potentially, asking people to wear masks when they're in public spaces, regardless of their vaccination status, and encouraging people who aren't yet vaccinated to go get vaccinated, making it possible for them to get vaccinated. That's how we try to stave off the hospitalizations and deaths that will follow this increase in cases.
Dr. Rasmussen, let me ask you this. Is it possible, and by the way, I've been thinking glass half full all day today, is it possible that we are right now in the peak of the Delta variant, and that being because many are vaccinated and also others that aren't vaccinated have gotten the COVID? Do you think it is possible that we're at the peak now and that maybe if the variant doesn't mutate, COVID doesn't mutate more, that we might see cases start to plunge in October maybe?
Well, that's the hope. Certainly, I don't know. It's going to vary from community to community, depending on how much COVID was there before and how many people are vaccinated when we hit a peak. And what we're probably going to see is really what we've been seeing over the last few months. We've been seeing the Delta variant increasingly in different communities at different times. And then cases are going up there as, the Delta variant is introduced. But as I said, it does matter a lot based on how many people are vaccinated in those communities. So a place like Seattle is going to be very different from a place like Alabama or parts of Florida where there's very low overall vaccination rates. My biggest concern, though, is with regard to the fall, is the fact that everywhere has a pretty large population of unvaccinated people who are not going to be vaccinated, and that is children under the age of 12. So we do know that certainly the Delta variant can spread among children, as can other SARS coronavirus 2 variants. But sending kids back to school, potentially without any types of mitigation measures in place to reduce transmission or exposure, we might still be seeing a lot of transmission in that population as school reopens in the fall.
So you have a big concern when it comes to back to school, especially down here in this area. Back to school, for the most part, will be happening in like a week or so. You have kind of a concern with back to school.
I do. And that is, again, just because we know that even though kids are at lower risk, including with the Delta variant, from developing severe COVID-19, they're still very susceptible to getting infected with SARS coronavirus 2. And really, it is just a numbers game. If you get enough kids that are infected, you will have a certain percentage, albeit lower than in older people, but a certain percentage of those kids will get very, very sick and end up going to the hospital. In addition to that, kids don't live at school. They will be going back home to their families. And if they have people in their households or people that they are close to, even if they've been vaccinated, but they may be immunosuppressed, they may be older at higher risk for severe COVID, that could mean transmission within that population as well. So back to school is definitely a big issue of concern, especially if it's taking place without any types of mitigation at all, including masks and improving ventilation and so forth, or requiring vaccines for teachers and staff. I think that we can have back to school, but we do need to take precautions given that the Delta variant can spread like wildfire in unvaccinated populations, and children under 12 are a large unvaccinated population.
Okay, just on that theme, because you've heard it, Doctor, where critics are saying having children wear masks is cruelty or child abuse, and there's no evidence that kids under the age of 5 get COVID. Are any of those statements true?
No, none of those statements are true. And the American Academy of Pediatricians has come out and said that there are no developmental issues with kids wearing masks. This is not requiring kids to wear masks 24 hours a day. This is requiring them to wear masks for some hours in the day when they're in a high-risk situation. That is not going to, at least according to pediatricians, that is not going to have a profound impact on those children's development. It's not abusive or cruel. I mean, masks are uncomfortable. Nobody likes wearing masks. At least most people don't. I certainly don't. But it doesn't mean that it's abusive to do it. I would argue that it actually is much more abusive to put children in a situation in which they can contract a potentially deadly virus with no protection. So I would
even children under 5,
even
children under the age of 5.
Even children under the age of 5. Now, there have been children under the age of 5 that have developed a condition called MIS-C, or it's a multisystemic inflammatory condition that's caused by COVID-19, and that can kill children under the age of 5. So I do think that it is important to keep kids, as long as they're in a classroom setting with a lot of people outside their households, to keep those mitigation measures in place to protect those kids. And I know that kids under 5 are not going to be, perfect examples of mask wearing. But that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be taught how to wear masks. That doesn't mean that the people who are caring for them and teaching them shouldn't be vaccinated and wearing masks themselves. Any type of mitigation measures we can put into place is great, because mitigation is additive. So that protection from the teacher wearing a mask adds on to the protection from the kids wearing a mask, the vaccines that the teachers have. All of that can add up to really, significantly reduce risk.
Thank you for answering that. Okay, I got Moderna, and Moderna announced today it has completed its submission to the FDA for full approval of its vaccine for people 18 and older. And over the weekend, I also read that there was some concern about the Moderna vaccine and a potential link to the heart condition myocarditis. Can you speak to that?
Sure. So this applies actually to both Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines. A number of younger people, mostly men, who have received these vaccines have had a condition called myocarditis. That's an inflammation of the heart. I would like to emphasize, now myocarditis is serious, but I would like to say that, to my knowledge, nobody has died from this myocarditis. In most cases, it is transient, meaning it goes away with treatment. And it has happened in a few hundred cases out of millions of people who've gotten these vaccines. So the risk of this myocarditis is actually quite low for getting the vaccine. This is certainly lower risk than, say, taking oral contraceptives and having a blood clot of some kind. So there are certainly medications that we take regularly that have a higher risk of side effects than this risk of myocarditis from the mRNA vaccines.
Dr. Rasmussen, we are joined by Dr. Angela Rasmussen, virologist, who shows up on our show at least sometimes once a week during this pandemic. A buddy of mine, friend of mine, hit me up, and he got the Johnson & Johnson, and he got that about 4 or 5 months ago whenever he was able to get it. And I know you got the Johnson & Johnson as well. Well, there's all this talk about boosters, and then there's all this talk about which vaccine has been more effective. He wants to know, if you've gotten a Johnson & Johnson, when is a good time, or if there's ever a good time, to be able to go and get another vaccine. Talk about that.
Sure. So this has been really frustrating to me because there just isn't as much data about Johnson & Johnson. So we can't do the type of vaccine effectiveness estimates that we've been doing for the mRNA vaccines. In addition to that, only really people in the U.S. have gotten Johnson & Johnson. There hasn't been that many doses of Johnson & Johnson given in other parts of the world. So the 12 million people or so in the U.S. who've received Johnson & Johnson are pretty much the only source of data that we have on this. And it's very frustrating. Today, the CDC said that, they're not recommending an mRNA booster for Johnson & Johnson right now, but there will be more data coming out and probably boosters will be needed in the future. It's very unclear what that means. It doesn't it doesn't seem clear at all that the CDC is going to recommend that people who got Johnson & Johnson get an mRNA booster. Now, other countries are doing this, including Canada, where I live now. Nobody here has gotten Johnson & Johnson, but a lot of people have gotten AstraZeneca, which in many ways is a very similar vaccine. They've relied on data from Canada, from Europe, from the United Kingdom that shows that it's actually not only safe to combine the AstraZeneca vaccine with the mRNA vaccines, it actually may produce a more potent antibody response. However, Johnson & Johnson has said that they will have data coming out soon that shows about what effect a second dose of Johnson & Johnson might have after 6 months. And they've been conducting a clinical trial to evaluate a 2-shot Johnson & Johnson regimen. So I imagine that the CDC is going to take a look at all of this and make their recommendation. But it doesn't look like they are going to recommend mixing and matching vaccines anytime soon. So it's very frustrating, I know, for a lot of the people who've gotten Johnson & Johnson, because a lot of them are doing basically what I did, and that is evaluating the evidence for themselves and then going and getting an mRNA vaccine. Now, I should add that the reason I did that was for a couple reasons, really. But one of them probably doesn't apply to most of your listeners, and that was that my province, Saskatchewan's reopening plan, was tied to the number of people in the community who had a vaccine. And I didn't have a Canadian vaccination record. So in part, I got my mRNA booster just to comply with the provincial recommendations here. I really wish that the CDC would come out with some recommendations about this, because people with Johnson & Johnson, I think, are largely feeling left behind.
Yeah.
Every time these new vaccination recommendations come out, they apply to the mRNA vaccines, and the Johnson & Johnson recipients say, well, what am I supposed to do? I can't make any medical recommendations.
But for yourself, you did get a booster.
I did get a booster in another country. So I would suggest that people who've had Johnson & Johnson speak with their own providers
always
about what's going to be right for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we are out of time. Thank you so much, Dr. Angela Rasmussen, our favorite virologist, and we'll be talking to you soon. Appreciate it.
It's always a